Hello, this is the Manchurian General, and today I'm gonna do a art guide of sorts, like a drawing guide of how to just to give you some general tips and tricks when you're drawing Lamellar, scale, Laminar, or armors that fall in between. But some of the stuff I say here, you can also apply to other types of armor, whether it be a plate armor, mail armor, or some sort of other type of armor. But generally, but we're gonna talk specifically about these types, the four you see on the screen right now, which is lamellar, scale armor, in betweens of scale armor and lamellar armor, and laminar armor. Now, the difference between these two is shown here on this side of the screen, which is basically the main way to differentiate those two, well, these types of armors is the way they overlap. Lamellar, for majority of the time, I'd say 95% of the time with a 5% margin of error, Lamellar overlaps upward. Scale overlaps downward. Scale is usually riveted to a backing of sorts, either leather, fabric, just some sort of leather or fabric, or even some rare cases like you see with certain Roman armor, Lorica plumata, the scale is riveted to the back of mail, as you see by this crude drawing I've made here, just to illustrate the point. So yeah, there's also a scale that can be laced, like this one. You see these on the early Chinese armors, like the Han Dynasty period and all that. Yeah, but generally speaking, lamellar overlaps upward, scale armor overlaps downward. Laminar is it can go either way. It can either overlap upward or downward, and it can be there's different ways to attach these. You can attach laminar to either well, it can be just, it has no backing, but it has leather strips to help aid with the overlap, or it can be laced together, like lamellar. Laminar can also go into different forms. There's the Lorica segmentata. That's laminar armor. There's certain types of Japanese armor that's also made of laminated plates. There's the shoulder plates that are also made of laminated plates. There's also arm guards, like full on like arm guards, like America. That's the most famous type. There's manica, which is just a sleeve of plates, arranged akin to either this upward or a downward pattern. Same thing could be applied to greaves, like a laminated, a laminated greaves, and even some cases sabatons. I'll say sabatons because you know what I mean by say sabaton, like a plated boot. Those you usually see in antiquity, like the Seleucids, Parthians, Sassanids, Romans in the later empire. Yeah, that's those sort of guys. So really, just cav heavy empires or factions that would later incorporate heavy cavalry and super shock cavalry. That's where you usually see these kinds of laminated armors that were already present, because the infantry of Rome had the Lorica segmentata, which only really lasted like a couple hundred years in the long scheme of things. Long scheme of things? Frick it. So in the in between, so these two still overlap downward. This type of armor, it's called the mountain pattern armor. You see this type of armor, East Asia. This type of armor overlaps upward. From what I've seen, for the most part, from what I've seen, this armor overlaps upward. So now that we got that out of the way, just to reiterate, lamellar overlaps upward, scale overlaps downward. Laminar can go either or. But if you're drawing something like a breastplate, it really depends on what the culture is or who's wearing it. Because Warwick Segmentaza, I'm pretty sure overlaps downward, while the Japanese cuirass, some forms of them, overlap. The points overlap upward, although it looks like a solid breastplate, but it is just laminated plates lacquered together. But yeah, that's really it about that's the general tips of or is what how you can tell the two apart and what to focus on or how to orient your armor when you're actually drawing. Now, here's the tricky part is when you're actually drawing the Lamellar in. So what you want to do first before you even start putting these armors in, the one thing you should get down first is the frame of your armor, like the borders of your armor. So like your tassets, your fold, your breastplate. I would just say breastplate because it's just I'm just referring to like armor on your body, on your torso. So I actually am drawing an example here. So this is what I mean. This is what I mean by framing your armor. You want to draw out the outline of it, just so you know how much you gotta do and how much how you're gonna orientate it. Now, once you get that bit done, then you want to render in the plates, the Lamellar plates or the scale plates or whatever armor you're deciding to draw. Now this really only well actually no this applies to any sort of armor. It applies to mail armor, scale armor, Lamellar, hell even plate. Even though plate you're already lining the armor because all it is just plates. It's just big plates. You're just drawing the outline and then you're doing the extra detail. That's really it with plate, which is why I find plate armor to be more simultaneously the simplest and also one of the toughest to draw, if you get what I mean. But yeah, with these sorts of armor, mail, scale, Lamellar, you want to get the frame in first, and then once you get that done, you want to draw the plates in. Now, where you start, it's up to you. Me, most of the time, I start from top to bottom. That usually doesn't work because you see here, the plates are smaller up here as compared to down here. But that's just a consistency problem for me. You may want to start bottom up. So, because Lamellar overlaps upward. So you want to do it bottom up. Makes sense, right? But once you get your plates down, however way you decide to put the plates in first, like me, even though I started upward, I started up to down, but while I did that, I went up to this first row, then did the sides, then go this way, whole way, and then I finished off this side, and then I did the fold. Or not this area right here of the cuirass. But once you get your plates down, depending on what type of armor you're drawing, then you want to put in the lacing. And the lacing will depend on how you designed your Lamellar, because most Lamellar pieces, it's there's a couple holes on the bottom. There's always two at the side, and there's always one on the top to do lacing this way. But not all armors did that. If we go back to the picture right here, this sort of Lamellar, this is Byzantine Lamellar. It has no top piece. It's only riveted side by side. Well, laced side by side. It's riveted to the backing on top, but it's laced side by side. But for the most part, most armors are riveted have a lacing hole at the top, bottom, and sides. Sometimes the bottom lace is longer than the top laces, but that just depends on design. Same thing applies to this type of scale, which has the Lamellar lacing, but since it's a scale, there's less area to work with. So overall you have to make the the lacing, you're drawing the lacings a bit smaller than you would on a Lamellar plate. But the thing is, you want to draw in your lacing, and you want to try to make it consistent as possible, because it's gonna be inevitable that you're gonna not draw them as consistent as the other. So just try to make it as consistent as you can. And then once you get all your lacing and plates done, you want to erase the pieces that are covered by something. If they're covered by something. That's the key word here. Because on this picture, the mannequin arm with the hand with the sword and the baldric, well, not the baldric, there's no strap going on here, but the sword belt, the straps that attach to the sword belt, they are covering some areas of the Lamellar. So whatever's in the area that's covered, you want to erase that. So you see these parts of the Lamellar plates, you want to erase a bit of the cuirass border here, this part as well, all the way down to here. You just want to erase out what is covered, and that will save you here's the thing, it'll only save you time if you didn't draw it in the first place. But I drew it in the first place because I want to keep myself consistent with how I leveled the plates. Because if I take out the plates here and the lacing, you see it dips in a bit. The sash dips in. This gets in the way, and it's kind of hard to tell sometimes if I'm making this like long enough and consistent enough. So that's why I drew it in. But if you're not drawing it in, then it would save more time in the long term if you didn't draw it in the first place. So that's a little disclaimer right there. But once you erase all the things, there you got your cuirass all lined out. Another tip, if you want to save time, is to just put more stuff in the way that's covering the armor in the first place. So say like a cape, right? You put on a cape, it covers most of the body, or at least the body that's covered in armor. That's less armor you have to draw. This applies to all sorts of armor, whichever you're drawing. If you have something covering it, that's less you have to draw, and that's more time you save. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to draw all the armor, all power to you. I do the same myself, for the most part. Sometimes I will take a couple of shortcuts if I'm on like a time crunch, but that's a different story. But yeah, right here you see in the mannequin, my mannequin is overlapping upward, as compared to some forms of mannequin that overlap downward. And this one's attached to a sleeve, like a detachable sleeve, as you can see by this part. So that's one way you can do it. Some are just attached by like an arming point, or just a lacing point on like different parts of the arming jacket. I'm just gonna call it arming jacket because it makes more sense that way. But yeah, the same thing also applies to scale. You want to start top to bottom. It makes more sense that way. You orientate yourself better that way. If you draw the scales top to bottom, then bottom to top. Bottom to top, it makes things harder. But if you do it top to bottom, it makes things more simpler and slightly more easy. Well, it depends on what kind of armor, what kind of scale. If it's like most of these scales, yeah, it's gonna take a while. But if it's like this type of scale, it's gonna be a bit faster, because all this essentially is, it's just a big square. It's just a square that you're just riveting to the back of a fabric, and you're just lining it up until you're done lining it up. So there's that. But yeah, I think I said all I need to say. Lamellar overlaps upwards, scale overlaps downward, laminar goes either way. You want to border your armor before you draw in the plates, regardless of what kind of armor you're drawing amongst these. Then if you're drawing Lamellar, after you get your lining in, you want to draw in your lacing. But general tip for all of these is if you draw something that's covering the armor, that's less of the armor you have to draw overall, thus saving you more time unless you drew it in before you erased it because of something that's covering it. But yeah, that's about it. This is the Manchurian General. Thank you for watching if you have watched this far, and if you want to see more of these types of videos, comment down below what you want to see next. Either of historical oriented videos or art videos like these, or something in between, like this video. If you want to support me in a financial sense, I have a Patreon down below, and on that I have 3 tiers so far. I have a $1 tier, a $5 tier, and a $10 tier. For the $10 tier, you are eligible for once a month. You can request a lined drawing from me. So that's a lined drawing. So that's a black and white picture drawing from me that's lined. So like just something akin to this, but more. Well, actually, no, something akin to this. If you want, this is completely optional. You can choose to or not, but the option is there should you choose to join that tier, and I'll have the names of the people who are part of the Patreon, who join the Patreon on the end screen of the videos. But yeah, that's about it. This is the Manchurian General signing off.